Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Daniel Hoffman and we're at the United Nations in New York. My guest today is Catherine Marchi-Uhel. Thank you very much for being on the show with us. You were appointed last summer by the United Nations Secretary General to head the International, Impartial and Independent Mechanism on Serious Crimes in Syria. You're presenting your first report this week at the United Nations General Assembly. Can you tell us what your initial conclusions are?
This report is, in fact, really setting out the vision that we have established on how to implement the mandate given to us by the General Assembly. And I remind you that this mandate is about collecting, preserving, and analyzing information and evidence of those crimes and building criminal cases to support prosecution of the same before national, regional, or international jurisdiction that have currently competence to deal with these crimes or that may in the future acquire such competence. So we are setting this vision, we are identifying in this report the guiding principle for our action, independence, impartiality, and what it means in practice. And we have already as well identifying some of the methodologies of work that will allow us to successfully fulfill this mandate.
Earlier this month, a chemical attack allegedly took place in Douma, near the capital city of Damascus. Is the use of chemical weapons some of the crimes that your team investigates?
Well, I would say that chemical weapons, use of chemical weapons or use of chemical agents as weapons in the context of an attack are in fact indeed covered by the mandate that was given to us by the General Assembly. This mandate is broad enough to cover the most serious crimes committed in Syria since March 2011. So in principle, yes, of course.
So I want to hear more about your working methods, because you are collecting evidence with a team that is working with you. I would like to know, first of all, how do you collect this body of evidence?
There is an important emphasis in the mandate to actually start by taking stock of what has been gathered by other entities. And by other entities, I mean in particular the Commission of Inquiry in Syria, the UN Commission, but also information gathered by states themselves, NGOs, including Syrian, but also international NGOs. So the first part of our mandate is to indeed take stock of that, analyze it, identifying gaps, then use our investigative mandate to supplement those gaps, to fill those gaps, and build cases, full-fledged cases, but also identify ways whereby we can support ongoing investigation. And as you may know, those investigations currently are undertaken by national prosecutors.
And I would like to know what kind of material you are collecting. Are these images, videos, testimonies, or maybe a little bit of everything?
Probably a little bit of everything, as would be the case in any investigation of serious international crimes. A case is usually relying on a number of pieces of evidence that corroborate each other, that supplement each other. But in the case of the Syria situation, and probably because these last 7 years have occurred at a time when everyone in possession of a mobile phone has the capacity to in fact record events and incidents taking place in front of that person. So you will have more than in the past conflicts, probably the evidentiary material consisting of digital and videos recorded on the spot, yes.
And you're getting a lot of those videos from people who are based in Syria on the ground. How do you make sure that these people, these individuals, are reliable?
Well, you're using technique of authentication, you're going back to metadata, you're actually comparing video materials and making sure that you're at the same time talking about events that have really been taken at the place they pretend to have been taken and at the time they pretend to have. There are techniques to do that. There are technologies that allow us to do that. And we are embedding in the team professionals whose expertise allows to conduct this kind of verification.
So I now want to turn to a few legal aspects of the body you're heading. What kind of jurisdictions are you working with? Are these national tribunals, as you were mentioning earlier, or are these future ad hoc tribunals that could one day be created for the Syrian civil war?
For the moment, courts and tribunals that have competence or that are exercising competence are indeed national courts, but in the future, the perspective of a referral of the Syrian situation to the International Criminal Court is possible, and it's also possible to envisage the creation of an ad hoc tribunal or even a mixed tribunal. And we have in the past had a number of these bodies being used as responses to situations where international crimes were committed.
You've been a judge for the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, also the tribunal for Kosovo. How does the work that you're doing now compare with the work that you were doing back then?
Well, the work as a judge is different than the work as a prosecutor, but there are a lot of common aspect to it. I was indeed not a judge, but a senior member of the chambers in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and I served as a judge in Cambodia and in Kosovo. What these functions have in common is that you are indeed either as a prosecutor articulating the reason why a certain amount of evidence would prove a case beyond reasonable doubt, for instance, and as a judge you are adjudicating that matter. So indeed there are a lot of common aspects, even if the roles are different. Is it different in the situation of Syria? Well, the situation is particularly complex indeed, but the techniques that you need to use to prepare a criminal case are very similar, in fact.
When do you expect the first prosecutions in Syria to take place? I assume that it will be years from now and that we probably will have to wait until the war itself has ended.
So you're talking about prosecution in Syria?
The prosecutions of crimes committed in Syria.
No, I'm making the distinction because indeed in an ideal situation you would have Syria reaching a point where at which it would be willing and able to take its part into the adjudication of these crimes. If you're talking about first prosecutions, I would say that there have been prosecutions and even convictions of individuals involved in the commission of crimes in Syria. I'm thinking in particular about cases in Sweden, for instance, and there are a number of investigations ongoing, so I'm not in a position to give you an exact timeline because I don't have that information, but I would say perspective of those cases leading to trials in a reasonably short period of time are indeed on the table, yes.
As an impartial body, you have to collect evidence from all sides taking part in the civil war, but there is one side, the Syrian government, that has a culture of secrecy, while the other side tends to overestimate its gains sometimes. How do you strike a balance between these two in order to arrive to some kind of truth?
Well, I think that in terms of methodology, as you said, it's an important part of our impartiality requirement that we would turn to every possible source of reliable information and that we wouldn't exercise bias against or in favor of specific providers. You receive the evidence that these entities want to share with you, and indeed you apply with the same scrutiny and the same very serious approach to determine whether the material is reliable, credible, and has probative value. I wouldn't treat information coming from the Syrian government, if it decided to cooperate with us, any differently.
You haven't gotten permission to travel to Syria as of yet. Do you intend to request such a permission in the future?
That's correct. We haven't got permission. Actually, at this stage, we are still trying to engage with the Syrian authorities, and I'm clearly committed to continue to do so. So, to answer the second aspect of your question, indeed, obtaining access to this territory would be extremely important to make full investigation.
And what would be the conditions in terms of security or in terms of access that you would need to lead the work that you want to lead?
Well, at this moment, you would primarily need an approval to get this access, and of course, security aspect would have to be taken into account in a situation where conflicts are ongoing.
Your body also relies heavily on a body of evidence collected by the UN member states themselves. How would you describe the cooperation with these countries, these states?
Well, it differs depending on the countries, obviously, and some of the countries have, as you probably know, a large number of countries have actually voted for the establishment of the mechanism and are likely to be more inclined to cooperate with it. But there are also countries that voted against and countries that abstained. So it's up to us in the mechanism to convince them that they can trust this body, and that even if they have, some of them, reservation about its establishment, that they can see that we are doing what we are meant to do in a professional and impartial manner.
Catherine Marchi-Uhel, the head of the International, Impartial and Independent Mechanism on Syria, thank you very much for being on the show with us today. And thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned on France 24 for more news.